conservation. She not only does she steward her own site, but she works in numerous other sites. She advocates for conservation action within the village of Oak Park, and really is an all-around local environmental champion. So Adrian, I will, with that, let you take it away.
Oh gosh, I feel myself blushing. All right,
I'll stop sharing.
Okay, and I will start. Let me just find my PowerPoint. We'll get started here. Here we are. Okay. Can everyone hear me okay, I hope? I should start by saying I am a volunteer for the Forest Preserves, and that will become relevant later on in the talk when I will give yet another pitch for voting yes, but we'll get to that. I've also very much valued the time that I've been in Wild Ones and also on the board. I want to thank board members for talking me into doing this talk. I wasn't really planning on it, and so here I am. It's pretty exciting. It's 30 by 30 is something that it's all over the internet. There's almost too much information, but I've tried to winnow some things down and I'll be talking about why it's so important. Okay, so what is 30 by 30 and how did it come about? And I'm just going to set the parameters for this talk right now, so bear with me. First of all, it's a UN-backed global initiative to protect and conserve 30% of Earth's lands and waters by 2030 and 50% by 2050. And this is very important, as you'll see when we go on. It is science-backed. This is not just, oh gosh, what's a good percentage that we should be saving? It's actually backed up by research, by modeling, and by math, actually. And it's designed to save more than the 1 million species that are at risk of extinction. And that's over 11% of total species. We are actually we're in trouble, basically, and we're in the middle of the 6th extinction, and I'm not going to go into that too much, but Elizabeth Colbert wrote a book about that whole topic called 6th extinction, and it's well worth reading. 30 by 30 offers us the chance to support systems that reduce carbon emissions, and this again is incredibly important. It's natural climate solutions. We hear a lot about carbon sequestration, carbon capture and sequestration. So far, it doesn't work. And I won't say any more about that, but restoring natural systems and working with natural systems is really the all in all and all around better bet right now. And 30 by 30 is an umbrella policy that literally has the potential to change land use policies around the world, here in the US, and even here in Illinois. So the other thing you should know is that 30 by 30 is a very recent phenomenon. Yes, ma'am.
I'm sorry. Are you sharing your screen yet?
I am. Did I?
Oh, because I'm not seeing it, and I don't.
You're not. Okay. You know what? Okay. I will start. You've been hearing what I said, though, right?
Yes.
Okay. Let me try again. I hit share, but apparently it didn't share. Yeah, okay. I apologize, everybody.
That's okay. You can't know until we tell you.
Yeah. All right.
Okay, now I see your screen.
Okay.
See a very nice photo of E.O. Wilson.
There he is, the towering figure of 20 and 21st century science and environmentalism. Yes, E.O. Wilson is completely amazing. All right, so I'm gonna sort of rewind a little bit. So you heard everything I said, and there were no pictures, so you didn't miss anything. And the thing that about 30 by 30 that's really kind of incredible is it's only been 5 years, and it's already influenced the IPCC, agreement, the Paris Agreement, the UN Conference on Biodiversity. 100 nations have joined an agreement that that this is a good idea. And I will continue talking about that. But back in 2016, I remember E.O. Wilson has always been a big hero of mine. And he put this book out, Half Earth. Maybe some of you have read it. And I got all excited because he had quantified that if you saved half of Earth's lands and waters for wildlife, that means like rejiggering your land use policies in metro regions and changing your agriculture, but also setting aside vast regions just for animals. You could save 80% of Earth's species, which is quite remarkable. And we'll get into that. And I remember myself just being so excited about that. Now, people have been talking about conservation for a really, really, really long time. I mean, even Plato was bemoaning the loss of trees in ancient Greece, and the Romans, their system of landifundia, pretty much, they had these large estates where they were kind of industrially producing grains, and they wore the land out. And people were talking, would write things about that. So there's a long history of conservation-minded folks who mostly in the Western tradition didn't get paid attention to very much. Now, China for 40 centuries famously was able to support their populations. Indigenous people in many cultures have thoroughly understood how to live with nature, but it's something that we in the West kind of forgot. And people like Thoreau, the German Romantics, all kinds of people started sounding the alarm. And Aldo Leopold famously put it as paraphrasing, how can the central problem for humanity or for a person is how to live on an acre of land without wrecking it. Now like I said, that's a paraphrase, but that's been our problem, as our populations have increased and we've become industrialized and so on and so forth. Nevertheless, certain things happened in the 20th century that enabled a completely scientific approach to conservation be able to be started. And part of that, again, in the 1960s, was E.O. Wilson and his partner in this endeavor, Robert MacArthur. E.O. Wilson, which is, as a non-math person, I find him very endearing because he didn't have the math to be able to quantify his insights about certain ecological processes. So he went out and found someone who could do the math. And they came up with the idea of island biogeography and species area relationships. And over here, you can see the math, and you can see it's if you were just reading the equation, to most people, it wouldn't make much sense. But unless you went beyond calculus, but in terms of the graph, you can easily see the larger the area, the greater the species richness. Now, what that means is if you're on a little island out in the middle of the ocean, you're probably not going to have very many species of animal because it would be hard for them to immigrate in, and there wouldn't be large populations, and there might be extinction. If you were on a larger island, it would be a little bit better. If you're on a large island next to a large continent, there would be flow of species. And so there'd be species coming in, there would be evolution, there'd be some extinction. There are also, of course, what they're saying, geo-environmental dynamics. In other words, what kind of climate is there, what kind of rainfall, et cetera. And you might have a situation where, as Darwin found in the Galapagos, finches just evolved into several different species, and there were quite unusual species there of other kinds of animals, partly because of the isolation, but partly also because of species were able to get to the island. Now, the interesting thing about this is that later work showed that in some regards, land islands, as we might want to think of them, act in the same way. And a lot of us have been talking about this. I mean, scientists have been talking about this for a really, really long time, but it was not until the late 20th century and early 21st century that computer power was big enough and the math was good enough and models, experiments have been going on long enough that some really good theoretical models came out and some really good predictions were able to be made. And in the meantime, they also found that at first they thought it had to be really, really big patches of landscape had to be set aside for speciation to continue and for populations to be able to support themselves. But they found that even really small patches of habitat matter. And that is something that we native plant gardeners know, because we're all planting for the monarchs, we're planting for butterflies, and our yards might be surrounded by streets and buildings, and yet if you plant them, they show up. The bees show up, other species of animals show up. And so it's demonstrable on nearly every scale, but it's now part of pretty established environmental theory. And one thing to remember is that ecosystems are nested. So your yard or your little garden or a stream and a forest preserve might be one sort of ecosystem. And what's around it, it's part of a bigger ecosystem, maybe a riverine environment, or maybe a block of gardens, or and then that gets larger and larger until you have something like the Amazon that has all kinds of ecosystems, mini ecosystems, medium-sized ecosystems, and large ecosystems within this one giant complex that we call the Amazon rainforest. So small patches, equally important, corridors and connectivity. The ocean impedes travel to these islands. Streets impede travel between corridors of woodland. So do farm fields. So do shopping malls. And our landscape is very, very fragmented. And so now there's a lot of work going on around the world to recreate corridors and connectivity, sort of as you see down here. There's a lot more room for species because they can travel along here. In Illinois, in where we live, the Des Plaines River, for example, functions as a kind of corridor because in Cook County, all the way up to Wisconsin, there are forest preserves all up and down the river. And so animals aren't stuck. They can travel, pollinators can travel, seeds can travel. And so it's a more vibrant ecosystem than it would be if it was just a little patch of woods here and a little patch of woods there. So here's this is from Australia, but it's kind of a diagram of what a human landscape would be like if it were managed according to 30 by 30. And you can see clearly some of the differences, and you'll see them even more clearly in a minute. But you can see how there are, they've got corridors going along the roads. They've got, it says native grasslands to provide pasture. So you've got regenerative farming and grazing going on, where you're probably rotating your cattle and you're reseeding with native grasses. You've got some food forest action going on here, some permaculture. You've got set-asides just for wildlife. And it's a very integrated kind of a landscape. And there's even, now it's more It's not what we might think of if we're from Chicago. They've got this little town over here and then they've got all this land. But if you think about the state of Illinois or Chicago within the state of Illinois, Wisconsin, and Indiana, you might begin to think that there might be some room to manage land like this. And so they say, and parks matter, and how you do your, as we said, how you do your gardens matters. And they're very careful to note that there are no dams on this river. And that's one thing that in Cook County, along the Des Plaines, they've taken out a number of dams, and the river is much healthier now than it was even 10 years ago. However, this is what we have now. And this is actually a photo of west of Joliet, Illinois. And anyone who flies into Chicago is very familiar with this kind of a landscape. This landscape is beyond fragmented. This landscape, a lot of people call it industrial farming. And it's pretty hard. Okay, this little piece of habitat is really important, and there's a little bit more habitat here. And you might look at it and think, oh my goodness, what are we going to do? Because that's most of Illinois. However, there are already changes going on in farm country, partly as a result of farmers, the Farm Bureau, USDA becoming more aware of climate change, but also the result of things like the Illinois Monarch Project that started, I think I'm not sure when it started, 2011, maybe 2012, something like that, where people from across the board, farmers, farm bureaus, people in ag industry, environmentalists, the IDNR, all kinds of people were brought together and worked together to make a monarch conservation plan. And it's working. Farmers are actually, in certain areas, they're planting pollinator meadows and pollinator crops. And I'm not going to go into the monarch part too much, but I'm saying that there's already a precedent for what we're trying to do with 30 by 30. Okay, so to go back to E.O. Wilson, he publishes his book, and people get really excited about it because it's in plain common sense language. It expresses what a lot of scientists had already been talking about, had already been modeling. And he made it in a way that the rest of us who are not scientists could really understand and get our heads around. A group of scientists put together, based on that, what they called a global deal for nature. And this is a really big deal paper. They published it in Science Advances, and they made an outline for how you could actually go about putting aside or conserving 30% of our earth, lands and waters, and 50% by 2050. And not only did they do that, but they specifically talked about green jobs. They talked about indigenous people managing their own land. They talked about green infrastructure. Our backyards, there is green infrastructure and rain gardens. And it's really worthwhile. I mean, just reading the abstract, because they really did they just laid it out. And this quote, which is I think it's from the abstract, is that if they put the global deal to nature, which is a pragmatic plan with the Paris Climate Agreement, it would help mitigate both of the serious catastrophes that are ongoing right now, which are climate change and species loss. And it would also mitigate the third catastrophe that we're dealing with, which is pollution. And I'm not going to get into that, but we know about it. Soot, plastics, chemicals, on and on. Okay, so this was in 2019. So this, to me, this is like incredibly fast. We have 2016, people start talking about it. These guys come up with a really, really serious paper. Other people get excited by the paper. So 2019, they published that. 2021 is the coalition launch of the High Ambition Coalition for Nature and People. And they were explicitly getting together as nations to work on this project of saving 30%, at least 30% of land and ocean. And I'm more concerned with the land for obvious reasons, but the ocean is a really big part of it too. And lots of the small islands got involved, and lots of the big countries got involved, and we'll talk a little bit about now more. It's chaired by Costa Rica and France, and then Great Britain is the chair for oceans. And they just started this in January of 21, last year. And I think by February, something like 50 countries had already signed on. Then comes in February of 22, a year later, climate change, the IPCC latest report about not just, oh my God, science, climate change is happening, but what the real impacts will be, how we could adapt, and what our vulnerabilities will be. And they, in this report, they enshrined 30 by 30 and said that if we want to maintain our Earth, if we want to keep a biologically functional Earth, we really need to do this, because our Earth is a self-regulating biosystem, and all of the parts, all of the relationships, the biotic relationships, are incredibly important for keeping it going. And it's even in things like that we don't really think about. Everyone's heard that a third of everything you eat is thanks to a bee, right? You've heard of those, you've heard that. But our oxygen, our the fish that we eat, if we eat fish, or the plants we eat, the ecosystems, fully functioning ecosystems across the Earth regulate our weather. And that's why people are upset about the Amazon, which is burning right now and which is being clear cut, because the Amazon is a weather driver for almost the whole world, and has for eons helped keep weather stable on Earth. And so we really, there's no overemphasizing the importance of keeping our global ecosystems so that they can be self-functioning. And so, yeah, so the IPCC report came out, and that made kind of a big, among certain circles, that was kind of a big deal. And in that report, they kind of showed, I'm not going to spend too much time on this chart, but the green arrow showing, usually in these reports, the red is going up because that's the higher temperature, and the green is going down because that's the more sustainable way of life. But they put 30 by 30 in the development, in the sustainable development section, which I thought was kind of interesting, because they also included not just ecosystem stewardship, but equity, equitable life, inclusion, green jobs, land-based jobs, indigenous cultural management. And so they put the green as if we did all of those things and did 30 by 30, it would help pretty much everything on Earth. And that sounds kind of pie in the sky, and it's very easy to get kind of down about things, but it's good to know that people are seriously thinking about how this could work. Okay, so by February 2021, 50 countries endorsed 30 by 30. In October of I don't have that, where am I? 21, the UN COP15, Conference of the Parties 15 on Biodiversity, convened in October 2021. And this is for the post-2020 biodiversity plan. It's sort of a twin to the Conference of the Parties for Paris, but we don't hear as much about it. And they convened in October 2021, and they took up this question of 30 by 30 and started arguing about it. And at that time, a lot of people were saying, oh, all the big, it's all just, they're going to make big conservation areas in Africa, and they're not going to let the native people live in Africa because in those areas, because they're just going to close them off. And that wasn't it at all. I mean, if anyone who reads any of the literature around 30 by 30, it's all about like honoring indigenous cultures and sharing and collaborating between Western scientific culture and indigenous cultures, and just working on this project together. And so I'm not quite sure where these other arguments came from, but they're there, they're out there. At any rate, by June of this year, 2022, over 100 countries had joined the Higher Ambition Coalition. In December, the Biodiversity Conference Part 2 will take place in Montreal. And it was supposed to take place in April. And I'm not going to lie, they've been wrangling, especially about the oceans. There's a lot of disagreement about just what to do about the oceans and how far, where marine reserve should be and so on. And there's other arguments going on, but I fully expect that it will be ratified. And as I keep repeating, it's just so quick when you consider that. When was the first conference of the parties for climate change? It was back in the 90s. There was a conference, and then there was another one in 2000, and then it went, and then the U.S. wouldn't ratify, on and on and on. And this is going really fast. And President Biden joined. The U.S. is part of the Higher Ambition Coalition. We have people going to the Biodiversity Conference. So we're really in. And in fact, one of the first things President Biden did was sign the 30 by 30 America the Beautiful executive order. And he said, they said in the order, is a 10-year locally led, voluntary, nationwide effort to restore and conserve America's lands, waters, and wildlife. And he meant business. And he said, the Council on Environmental Quality, USDA, NOAA, Department of Commerce, and you folks have to put together a report. I want it soon. And what are we going to do? How are we going to run it? How are we going to implement it? What is it going to look like? And I should take a moment to say that some of these slides are courtesy of Chicago Wilderness, who has been very big on the Illinois effort. And I'll be talking about them more, but I forgot to say that at the beginning, so I just wanted to put that in. So 30 by 30 in the US, again, it's not just big reservations of land somewhere. It's not just making our parks, our national parks, even bigger. It's everything, everywhere. So it's wilderness, it's wildlife refuges, but it's also Central Park, New York. It's farms, and it is marine protected areas, and also some freshwater protected areas like Michigan, for example. And importantly, the corridor part is also important. For example, I think it's the Yellowstone Yukon corridor out west, which is enabling the big fauna to move, bears and elks and other animals like that. So I'm just going to read this because to me this is really important. The agencies issued their report in May of 2021, and there are 8 goals, and they track very closely with the Global Deal for Nature and also the IPCC and of course the High Ambition Coalition. which is to pursue a collaborative, inclusive approach to conservation, conserve America's lands and waters for the benefit of all people, support locally led and locally designed conservation efforts, because conservation can't look the same everywhere. It's going to look different in Florida. It's going to look different on the Gulf Coast than it does here in Illinois. Honor tribal sovereignty and support the priorities of tribal nations. And that's equally important. You know, there's really exciting things going on with the reintroduction of bison on the high plains, for example. And it's led by tribes and it's supported by like Fish and Wildlife for the US or DNR. Pursue conservation and restoration approaches that create jobs and support healthy communities. Again, very important. Looks different in different places. Jobs along the shore on the East Coast are going to be really different from jobs here in the Midwest. Honor private property rights, support the voluntary stewardship efforts of private landowners and fishers. Well, for example, Ducks Unlimited they've done a huge amount. I mean, they're supported by hunters, and they've done a huge amount to help conservation of wetlands. I think it's something like 59% of Cook County is privately owned. I mean, you know, you've got to get private landowners involved. Using science as a guide and building on existing tools and strategies with an emphasis on flexibility and adaptive approaches, because that's another thing. There's no one size fits all. And we've spent the last over at least 150 years in Western culture figuring out, learning about how ecosystems work and how we can best work with them. So this is a nice little map that shows around the world what needs to be saved, what areas are already at a high level of protection, and what areas could do a lot better. And you'll notice that we here in the Midwest, smack dab in the heartland, in the or the corn and soy capital of the world, right here, it looks pretty bad from a global level. It says we're something like 10%. And to those of you who are familiar with monarch conservation, this map should look kind of familiar, because you'll notice it's the monarch flyway. It's also bird migration flyway right down here. This green patch, I think, is the Mississippi River. This little yellow patch that you can barely see might be the driftless region, or it might be Hackmatack. I'm not quite sure what that is. And I feel certain that if they zeroed in even further, they'd notice that in Northern Illinois, we're a little bit better, but this is global. And what I'm going to be talking about now, starting out, is how we are doing better. And the other interesting thing to know, to go back to the HAC for a minute, India joined, and you see how they have very little protected land. China and Russia have not joined. And as we know, they're having really big problems in the boreal forests up here, where they've been having fires and methane bubbles and all kinds of, you know, permafrost melting, but they haven't joined. And China has its own logic. And here in the West, there is a huge amount of protected land. And some ranchers have objected because they think it's going to be a land grab. And again, I feel that anyone who reads any of the literature and talks to anybody about it would understand that it's not meant to be a land grab at all. And so, and not trying to hurt anybody's rights or anything like that. So I'm not quite sure what the deal is there. So here we are in lovely Illinois. Let me just see. Whoops, sorry. And these are shots from Northern Illinois. And as you can see, we've got all of those kinds of lands that can be conserved. We've got water, we've got urban farms, we've got nature preserves, we've got a lot of farming in northern Illinois, surprisingly enough. And these are the landscapes that 30 by 30 in Illinois are worth working with and proving that we can do a lot better than a 10% protection or 10% conservation. And we're already, as many of you know, we're already making strides. We're all just the Illinois Monarch Project, the forest preserves. There's all kinds of organizations in the suburbs in other suburbs of Illinois, and there are beginning slowly to be changes as you go further south into where the prairie was. So the Illinois 30 by 30 coalition got together sometime, I think, in 2020, or maybe 2019. And that included Chicago Wilderness and the Environmental Council and all kinds of the forest preserves of different counties. All kinds of folks got together and said, hey, 30 by 30 is a great idea. We need to do it in Illinois. And I should say that other states have been taking strides in this direction also. And the thing that was kind of appealing about the Illinois plan is that a bunch of high school students in Pontiac, Illinois, with their environmental science teachers, worked with state representatives to craft legislation that would establish a task force for 30 by 30. And this task force convened in 2021, and they had listening sessions, and they had presentations, and they were supposed to have a report due to the governor by July, which they have not announced. However, someone at IDNR did inform me that they have written a draft, and I think they're revising it before they finally submit it. And the thing that's interesting about the task force is that, again, like Illinois Monarch Project, and like as you should be doing in 30 by 30, because you're trying to get all hands on deck, it's not just the environmental folks, it's representatives. They included the teachers and students, which I thought was really great. It's the Illinois Farm Bureau, it's Audubon, Nature Conservancy, kind of representing a lot of different organizations, U of I, and then down at the bottom, how weird is this? The Fertilizer and Chemical Association, Corteva Agriscience. Whoa, that's kind of out there, but they all talked together and have come up with a plan of recommendations, which I'm sure we'll start seeing. And actually already the governor has announced various kinds of grants that are available to conservationists to kind of kickstart getting conservation going. And that's happened on a national level too. There was money in the Inflation Reduction Act to start kickstarting all kinds of conservation actions. So I just want to take this picture. This is the Chicago Wilderness region. Chicago Wilderness was started in the mid-20th century, and it was designed as an organization, as kind of an umbrella organization composed of over 250 organizational members plus individuals. And it's designed to help organizations and people collaborate on conservation issues. They have two conferences. They have the Chicago Wilderness Congress, and there's Wild Things, which is Chicago Wilderness, but it's also Audubon and some other groups. And some of you might have gone to Wild Things or the Chicago Wilderness Congress. I go to both. And what I love about this picture is it shows how diverse, biodiverse the Chicago Wilderness region is. And the Chicago Wilderness region actually goes up into Wisconsin. It comes around the lake, out into the western suburbs, and then around up through the shoreline of Indiana and into Michigan. And this is a very unique region. It's incredibly biodiverse, even despite the fact that so many million people live here. And it is what's called an ecotone. That is, it's where prairie, woodland, shoreline, and boreal species all kind of do a mashup in this particular place. So it's a very unique set of ecosystems. And whenever I fly into Chicago, which is not often, because mostly I stay home, so I don't fly out, this to me is like a really beautiful representation of what it's like, because you come up, let's say you're coming from the south, or you come up through the farm fields, and it's all like what we saw in the previous slide, and then you come, the closer you get to Lake Michigan, the more biodiverse and wet and beautiful, to my eyes, the country gets. So it's worth saving, is what I'm trying to say. So in Chicago, in the Illinois portion of the Chicago wilderness, and it's worth thinking about some of the numbers here and acres. And you can see how they have gray is developed, Chicago and Oak Park and LaGrange and Berwyn and down here to down up towards Calumet. But you can see there's protected area in here, and we'll talk about that. And then out here is all the agriculture. But they've broken it down. Now remember, an acre is about the size of a football field. So the total acreage of this piece of Illinois is 4,770,000 acres. We've done a pretty good job of protecting 375,000 acres, but 30%, you need over 1 million acres to get to 30% in this region. And how are we going to do it, right? Yeah, we're going to try to talk farmers into changing their ways. And I have a feeling, just a hunch, that as electric cars take off, maybe not so many farmers will be planting corn fence row to fence row to get, because ethanol production will go down, I hope. And maybe they'll turn to actually growing food, or maybe nut crops, or who knows. But I feel like because of the change in transportation will lead to change in farming practices. But still, it's daunting. How are we going to do it? Taking it down a notch even further, Cook County, 604,800 acres. Remember, there's over 5 million people living here. 1/3 would be over 200,000 acres. And the nice thing about Cook County is that we have 11% of our county is protected by the Cook County Forest Preserves. And I know in DuPage and Lake County and Kane County, there's a lot going on out here too, but I live in Cook County, so I'm going to talk about Cook County. So here we need 132,900 acres. And actually you can see I live in Oak Park, so I'm broadcasting from right here in Oak Park. And so again, the question is, how are we going to get it? We've already got 11% just protected. And we've also got a lot of private property. We've got parks, and a lot of park districts are getting into native plantings and things like that. But we'll see. How are we going to do it? And it turns out that the greatest potential plantable, conservable space is actually residential. So that means all you folks and me too. Open space and conservation, just plain old open space, even vacant lots. This is from Illinois Monarch Project, but it still holds true for conservation in general, because if you're managing your land for monarchs, you are managing your land for all the other species. That's why they're such an important keystone indicator species. And so we all have a part to play. Now, in I think 2011, Pam Todd and Stephanie Walquist put together West Cook Wild Ones. We are, and I'm going to boast a little bit, we're a chapter of the Wild Ones, National Wild Ones, but the idea was to create a corridor between, the original idea, a corridor between Columbus Park and JR Woods. There's 100 species of birds that live around here, and it goes up dramatically during migration time. So right now there's a lot of species of birds around that you might not normally see. And providing connectivity, even in an urban setting, because this is a pretty urban area, between Cook County Forest Preserves and Columbus Park, which was beautifully designed with native species by Jens Jensen and is a great birding site. You can see how many people have responded just in these few years that we've been in existence, and have created native plant gardens. And it's not just people's backyards, it's libraries, it's parks, it's right-of-ways. It's really pretty amazing to see what has happened. And not only has that been happening now, which is why it's easy to think about 30 by 30 around here, but in the larger Northern Illinois area, you can see how Chicago Living Corridors started mapping where all the native plant gardens and private conservation was going on in this whole area. And you can see how it's exploding. And blue is West Cook Wild Ones. Conservation of Home is up here somewhere. I'm not sure what all the colors are. Each color is a different organization. The black is our friend Monica at Red Stem Landscaping. She got all these gardens. She's done. She and her crew have been working right in here a lot. So that's exciting. So you can see that it's not only globally, but grassroots and just regular folks can all be working on helping solve this problem. And it gives, I don't know, to me, it gives me a feeling of hope, because I can't do anything. I mean, I suppose I have a hybrid. Maybe I'll probably get an electric car at some point, and I try not to drive in general, but there's not a lot I can do about that. I can't make the car companies make electric cars any faster, but I can go out and I can plant my backyard, and I can join with my neighbors, and we can make a difference. So I'm going to issue a call to action to every single person who's listening to me. First, you all are already doing this, I know. Maintain, expand your native plant garden. From that to that, okay? And that's one thing that is so cool about 30 by 30. It's completely scalable. No matter how, if you live in a balcony, or no matter how small your yard is, or if you're sharing a yard or whatever, set aside a third of that space and plant some native plants that bees like. That's all you have to do. And I know people, I do not do, I mean, I have a yard, so I don't know much about balcony gardening, but I know that people do it with native plants. And it's, any little bit helps. And it helps if you have neighbors who are doing the same. It automatically creates a much larger patch of habitat, as Doug Tallamy says when he's talking about our Homegrown National Park. You know, we have so much lawn that if everybody planted native plants, it would be as big as a national park. Secondly, create habitat and register your property. You can get certified as a Monarch Way Station. You can do conservation at home. You can do National Wildlife Federation. But make your garden into a habitat. Don't just put, as you know, all of you, I'm sure, are already preaching to the choir. It's like you're landscaping not just for how do the colors look, but you're landscaping for a four-dimensional effect of who's living there and what, and can they support themselves. And you're talking about underneath the ground as well as in the trees. Help change your neighborhood. Okay, this is a big deal. This person who planted this yard, this parkway. I'm sure that her neighbors were, I don't know what, shocked, maybe surprised. I'm sure it created a lot of talk in the neighborhood. It doesn't look like weeds. And when I say help change your neighborhood, I'll give you an example. In 2009, my next door neighbor at that time was also a native plant gardener. And we had not seen any hummingbirds on our block in years. I mean, I don't think I had ever. So we decided we were gonna bring hummingbirds to the 1000 block of Home Avenue in Oak Park. So we started planting red flowers and we put out hummingbird feeders, and we started talking to our neighbors, and we gave our neighbors lists of plants that they also could plant. And I still grow and give away plants to my neighbors that are hummingbird friendly. And it took 2 years, but hummingbirds came back to our block. And that's what I mean, change your neighborhood. Now there's always hummingbirds on the 1000 block of South Home. And people, when we're first starting doing it, they'd get so excited, like they'd see me on the block and they say, "Oh, I saw a hummingbird, I saw a hummingbird." And it just took putting in the right plants and having some patience and talking to folks, and our neighborhood was changed. Our block was changed. And so anyone can do that, I think, if it's just by example or talking to people at your block party or whatever. Get active in a local group or start one. Call to action, join your church or school green team, join a nature organization, join Audubon, join Chicago Wilderness, join volunteer at the Forest Preserves, whatever. Join a citizens advisory commission. Like our park district has a sustainability commission that I was on for a while, where we would talk about, okay, where can we put in rain gardens? Where can we put native plants? In River Forest, a group of people started a green advisory commission. Government didn't ask them to do it. They just spoke up. They got together, they just discussed what should be done, and they started taking action. And now they are a government commission in River Forest. And I'm just going to put a plug in for Wild Ones because I think we're great, and we think the more the merrier. So think about us. And push for policy changes. Again, I live in Oak Park, so I'm talking about Oak Park. On August 1st, Oak Park Village trustees approved Climate Ready Oak Park, which is a big deal. It took a long time to get this going, years and years and years. And finally, there was political will. They hired there's been a couple of really smart sustainability coordinators working in Oak Park. Village board got more on board, and they started a process, but it was citizens who really pushed to get this going. And then once the team was hired and put together, they reached back out to find groups, find focus groups, find people to input. So it wasn't just the same 10 people. Because here's a secret about civic involvement. A lot of people don't do it. They're too busy or whatever. If you show up and you're one of the 10 people that show up, then your voice is going to get heard in a way that you'd be surprised. I mean, maybe not on a state level, maybe not on a national level, but where you live, definitely. So it's worthwhile getting involved. And I can truthfully say that the fact that we now have a climate change plan in Oak Park is because a lot of people spoke up and did, showed up to meetings and talked and voted for people that said they were in favor of sustainability, and on and on and on. And in that plan, and I'm really proud of this, Oak Park says establish 30% of our land as green infrastructure or enhanced park management. Because that's the thing about 30 by 30. It's not only about wilderness, it's about what we're doing. Are we using a rain garden to manage our water with native plants instead of building a gutter of some sort? Are we planting our parks in ways that are going to be bird friendly as well as people friendly? And it's right there in the plan. And I am also going to boast a little bit, because West Cook Wild Ones, we have members and we have board members that don't, live in surrounding suburbs, but we were involved in this Oak Park effort, and we worked with the village sustainability coordinator, and she and the team looked at our resources and thought about it and talked about it, and they established this as one of the really important goals for our village. And that is, to me, that's an example of how 30 by 30 is important, it's attractive, and people want to do it. And I'm looking, and it's going to change how we land use in Oak Park. It's going to change how things are landscaped, how public, how the parks look. It'll be really interesting to me to see what happens with that. So also, the other thing you can do is vote for conservation initiatives that help 30 by 30 goals. I don't know what's happening out in DuPage or up in Lake or in Kane. I hope that they're having conservation initiatives. I know that there's really good conservation organizations out there. But here in Cook County, so if you live in Cook County, I'm going to say vote yes for the referendum. On November 8th, if you're doing early voting, the referendum is at the bottom. It's past the judges. So once you get through all the judges, you vote yes, and it will enable, it's a very small property tax increase, but tiny. We have not, the forest preserves have to ask the public for increases in funding, and they haven't since 1930. And with that extra money, they would increase acreage from almost 70,000 acres to 90,000 acres. So hooray for 30 by 30, right? Because you're putting 20,000 more acres into conservation, into being managed for conservation, for the 100 species of endangered species that live with us, 5 million people. They want to close their pension gap. They want to pay their staff more. They want to support their volunteers better. And all in all, it will continue helping Cook County have better air, better water, and more open space. To me, it's a win-win. And of course, I'm a volunteer for the Forest Preserve, so of course I'm gonna say yeah, yay, hooray. But if you are interested in helping with 30 by 30, it's like the easiest thing you can do practically. Don't even have to get your hands dirty. Right? So yeah, go to www.voteyesforforestpreserves.org, sign up, get bulletins, and make sure you vote. And as an end, thank you for your patience. And this is why I'm doing what I do. My yard kind of gets away from me once in a while, but I want to show you this little bumblebee. I was playing with my phone. That's a Bombus bimaculatus. And partridge pea offers them a lot of pollen, which gives them protein and fat for energy and to feed their youngsters. So there you are. So thank you for listening. And yeah, I hope you, whoops, sorry about that.